Today we begin a Glastonebury Romance by John Cowper Powys. It's approximately 1,120 pages long. I'll be reading it in 15-minute or so increments. I'll begin with the author's bio. John Cowper Powys, novelist, poet, critic, and philosopher, was born in 1872, the eldest son of the Reverend C.F. Powys. On his mother's side, he was descended from the families of the poets Donne and Cowper, and his two brothers, Theodore Francis and Llewellyn, also achieved literary fame. Educated at Sherborne and Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, he was a lecturer in America for many years, and many of his most famous novels were written away from that England he loved so much. He died in 1963. His other books include Wolf's Solvent, Maiden Castle, Porreous, Autobiography, Owen Glendower, and Weymouth Sands. 2. My youngest sister and oldest goddaughter, Lucy Amelia Penny. A grave for Mark, a grave for Gwynthur, a grave for Gawain of the ruddy sword. Not wise the thought, a grave for Arthur. And that's from the Black Book of Carmarthen, translated by John Rhys. I will be mispronouncing many words. I don't care. Preface to the new edition. It is an exciting and a disturbing experience for an old writer to make a serious effort to put into words his long-considered conclusions as to what makes a good romance, or, to express it a little differently, what a properly widened, properly deepened, properly rounded-off romance should be. And when these conclusions are brought by him into direct connection with a romance written by himself, it is indeed a dive into risky and tricky waters. And at this point, a crucial question crops up. What about fashion in literary moods and in their expression? Ought an old writer to try to translate into the conscious movements of his mind as his mind works today? What of necessity were the more spontaneous and more instinctive workings of his mind as his mind worked when he was writing in this particular romance? The whole thing is a deeply interesting psychological problem. And I wanted once to put to my readers the bold and sweeping question, is this ticklish business of translation from the mood of my mind when I wrote a Glastonebury romance to the mood of my mind in which I am now reintroducing it necessary at all? Why not defend it, explain it, struggle to justify it, just as if they were now being published for the first time? Because, some of you will reply at once, because you, the author of this lengthy novel, are not the only mind in the world that has changed in this last quarter of a century. The minds of this world have changed. The mind of what we call the reading public has changed. Well, yes. I do admit and confess all that. And as I reintroduce her of this tumultuous tale of a quarter of a century ago, I must do my utmost to see it and feel it in relation to those lasting characteristics of my whole temperament and nervous system which do not change from the form of expression of passing ideas. What I must try to do now is to hover around this book and dart at it like an extra-large specimen of those curious insects we used to, as boys, call hoverers, and which my young Sherborne friend Hugh Bell, who was killed, if I am not mistaken, in the Boer War, used to collect as if they had been butterflies. Oh, what psychological secrets deep almost as life I keep coming upon more and more richly as I play the part of one of Hugh Hill's hoverers, and why my concise Oxford Dictionary doesn't etymologize that word I cannot understand, but the secrets I discovered at once as I play the hoverer have to do with the very pith and quick of this inquiry. I begin by talking about translating our mental tone of the past into a mental tone of the present. Well, this playing the part of one of Hugh Hill Bell's hoverers, or in a Glastonebury romance, has taught me that all attempts at any such translation only confuse the issue. In criticizing as much as inventing, we have to strip and dive naked into the element in which we are immersing ourselves, whether it be earth or air or fire or water. No. I have learnt already in my critical hoverings around a Glastonebury romance that every novelist is almost as different from every other novelist as any man is different from any woman. The style of all writers, worth, as we say, their salt, differ basically, fundamentally, inherently from one another. And this difference goes down to the marrow of the bones of their character. For instance, I have been assured that both Cardinal Newman and Joseph Conrad suffered pain rather than enjoyed pleasure in polishing their perfect paragraphs. Whereas you have only to read half a page of any book by Anatole France to get the feeling that the art of composition was to him an intensely enjoyable undertaking. Yes, I've already discovered by playing the hover around a Glastonebury romance that, in this kind of novel into which I fling my whole nature, I work almost unconsciously as far as life and reality and nature and human characters are concerned. While I remain most vividly aware of the particular books and particular writers and particular friends who have influenced me in my book, I am in fact, another insect model you see, a born bookworm turned novelist or fabulist. As a bookworm, I have devoured with a greed beyond what anyone could call critical, and with an enchantment and intoxication that was like being drugged, all the novels of Scott and Dickens and Dostoevsky and Balzac and Hardy and Henry James. These novels I have read over and over again, and I know them only a little less know that I know the poetry of Wordsworth and Keats and Matthew Arnold and Edgar Allan Poe and Paul Verlaine and the essays of Charles Lamb and Walter Pater. Yes, I've discovered by now, hovering around and around this long romance about Glastonebury and the Grail, that my talk about translating my mood when I write it into my mood, as I now reintroduce it, is wholly misleading. I have to plunge then into discovering or inventing the sort of picture of life that fascinated and enthralled me the most. A picture of life for which I was unconsciously indebted to my own temperament and consciously indebted to books, that is to say, to a certain selection of favorite books. What, in writing a Glastonebury romance, I derive from any sort of calculated and deliberate observation of real life is completely negligible. I am as much a doting devotee of fiction as any slipshod lovely of the poet masters or any Dolly Tearsheet of the poet Shakespeare. In our dormitory at school, I always had under my pillow some paper-bound sixpenny Harrison Ainsworth, for the devouring of which I used to wake up long before anyone else. And now, as I hover around a Glastonebury romance, I can see that it is not the work of any sense and observer of real life. What, in fact, does this long book attempt to describe in its somewhat tumultuous and chaotic manner? Nothing more and nothing less than the effect of a particular legend, a special myth, a unique tradition from the remotest past in human history upon a particular spot on the surface of this planet, together with its crowd of inhabitants of every age and of every type of character. What has made this tradition of the Grail so absolutely different from all other Christian legends and myths is that it is so near, so close, so vibrantly akin to eating and drinking and lovemaking and even to voiding our excreta. Excreta? In its long history, in contact with our heroic, pitiful human life, it has succeeded in establishing itself both as a reality touched by the miraculous and as a miracle based on reality. And that must also be noted. This has happened to only a very few other phenomena in the staggering dimension of the multiverse. But of the Grail, now that it has been accepted as an impenetrable mystery, it has found its way into the Elysian realm of what we can only call the poetry of our race. And being once acclimatized there, and if I may be permitted to expression, autochthostanized, Autochthonized, there, and indeed become a recognized resident alien there, from the international sphere of universal metaphysical magic, it has not only stained, dyed, impregnated the atmosphere of this particular spot, but has associated itself with every detail of its local history. No, it has already become clear to me that as I play the part of that encircling and darting insect to whom my concise dictionary has refused the honor of a proper species name, that my first idea of deliberately trying to translate the thought frame of one epoch of my life into the thought frame of another epoch of my life, or of my reading public's life, is a misleading idea. And those delicate and difficult problems, whether literary or psychological, we're just got to plunge and dive and have done with it. We've got to swim like a fish, to burrow like a mole or worm, to fly or to hover like a bird or an insect, and finally to take the substance, as best we can, of a chameleon-like salamander, so as to bathe freely at the risk of our sanity in the most dangerous elements of all. What drew me at first, you asked, to Glastonbury and to King Arthur and to the Grail? No, not you can imagine any pathetic neophytish craving to copy some pure-hearted Sir Galahad. My father being Victor of Montacute, whose own wooded Mons Acutus was in full sight of Glastonbury Tor, only some 10 miles away, was himself obviously my most natural incentive for undertaking such a quest. But any man, in what might you call youthful middle age, beginning to exchange the platform for the pen, in whose favorite personal enjoyment of books reach a climax of perfect satisfaction, only when mixing together in reckless oratorical disarray, treasure trove from such contrarious magnetic minds as Scott and Dostoevsky, Walt Whitman and Walter Pater, Hardy and Edgar Allan Poe, would I should think of by a sort of instinctive obedience to Anthropos, the oldest, frailest, yet most inexorable of the three fates, have struggled to make the Grail the lodestone he needed to give some sort of rounding off to his shuffled, scurried, and somewhat chaotic excursion into the complicated journeyman's job of composing a long romance. Even the hovering and peering activity of my instinct-like alter ego took a teasingly long time in discovering the simple truths that what really allured me about the Holy Grail were the unholy elements in both its history and its mystery. In other words, the unquestionable fact that it was much older than Christianity itself. Christianity instinctively clutched at it as an ideal receptacle for the blood of the Redeemer, but it has other levels of reception in its sacrosanct grillage, and it remains a dedicated symbolic center for all those primordial cosmic fetishes, which are the broken, baffled, but ever-returning visions of some sort of conscious identity after death, visions that hint indeed at strange degrees of consciousness into a world which, though as material as you please, remains, with all its offspring, insubstantial as the stuff of dreams. No. All the feverish struggles, all the frantic wrestlings with the mystery of life, such as the obdurate elements of which life is composed, forever challenging and forever escape, are inherently of the same spirit. Age does not wither them, nor the passing of time stale them. In Old Welsh and Old Irish and Old Highland mythology, age was for the saints of Saviour of our present faith appeared in Glastonebury or ascended that Tor, which my father used to point out to me from the slopes above our home at Montacute. The earth goddess had her cauldron of the food of life safely guarded in our island of the west, where Cronos still awaits under forest heaps upon forest and mountains, piled upon mountain as final release from the tyranny of Zeus, and where the other cauldron, the cauldron of rebirth, alternates between salvation and destruction as a fatal zodiacal cycle revolves in the pivot of the everlasting mystery. As I felt about the book when I wrote it, so do I feel about it now. Its heroine is the Grail. Its hero is the life poured into the Grail. Its message is that no one receptacle of life, and no one fountain of life, poured into the receptacle can contain or explain what the world offers us. From the sands and the waters, from the reeds and the waters of the East Coast, we may pass, as my own Norfolk-born mother passed, to the mysterious stones of Stonehenge and the not less mysterious Vale of Avalon. Born myself widely between the house of her country and the store of his country, I was sufficiently Derbyshire bred till the age of 7 to possess and to have deliberately indulged that weakness in the head which is absolutely essential to a writer of romances. For you cannot compose an intimately and indigenously exciting romance, as I learned at school from a clever and fastidious boy called Squit Harrison, who first introduced me to the author of The Count of Monte Cristo, without the presence not only of some sort of chorus of a lively and diverting simplicity, such as a group of children deliriously with the delight of not being in school, but also of some lonely and extravagant fanatic of a fanatic's originality, who has something about him of a crazy pantaloon, and also something about him of an inspired dervish. For it is essential to weave into the innermost warp and woof of such a tale the tapestry, complication of a Mephistophelian contest between the power of order and the power of disorder, so that a crack can appear in the thick rotundity of the world of convention, through which the terrible possibilities of moral tragedy are for a moment realized in the danse macabre of the Chthonian divinities made for a moment audible. What I aimed at when I wrote this book a quarter of a century ago, though it feels to me as if it were 3/4 of a century ago, was to convey a jumbled up and squeezed together epitome of life's various dimensions. Whether they ever are condensed to the tune in real life, I have not then, and have not now, the remotest idea. The influences that have made it necessary for me to talk and write, and I was just at the bridge over my life stream between the former and the latter mode of earning my living when I comprised this book, can be reduced to 2 animal sensations and poetical impressions. Apart from my parents and my brothers and sisters, I have been, all my days, so much of a medium for so many swarms of invisible things. Medium is the epithet, if we can turn a noun into an adjective, that my old friend Lewis Wilkinson always applies to me. That the dominant human influences in my life are few. There are, however, 2 persons, both men, whose influences have affected the whole of my literary life. One of them is the Roman Catholic philosopher W.J. Williams, author of a book called Newman, Lausy, and the Catholic Church. The other is of no less original doctor of medicine is Chiswick Bernard Price O'Neill. The personalities of these 2 men have deeply influenced all my best fictional writing, and from my own point of view, the fictions I have written is worth much more than my lay sermons. But not only apart from my parents, my brothers and sisters, and these 2 above-mentioned men, I have been especially lucky to have been able to share my brother Theodore's and my brother Llewellyn's friendship with Lewis Wilkinson, whose pen name is Lewis Marlowe. He was at school with Theodore and at Cambridge with Llewellyn, and is our oldest family friend. But it remains that, of all our Wessex writers, I am the most hopelessly and incredulously bookish. Yes, I am an incorrigible bookworm with a desperate mania for trying to write the sort of long romances I have always loved so intensely to read. And after all, unlike my father, I am not a native of Wessex. My native river is neither a Norfolk river, as my mother's was, nor my father's Star, but the Derbyshire Dove. Returning, therefore, to this particular romance, what I am attempting to do now is reintroducing it is what I attempted to do when I originally wrote it, namely to catch something, however faint, and whether it be Christian or heathen, of the flavor and fragrance of the Grail itself. No, the Christian faith, whether Catholic or Anglican or Lutheran or Baptist or Independent, has no monopoly on this mystery. Like Walter Pater's Mona Lisa Madonna, it is not only older than the rocks, or older than all the land and all the sea across from which it moves, and over which it hovers. It is older than the minds of men, older than the beauty of woman, older than the worship of the gods, older than the orbits of the stars. The Grail has its counterpart in the mythology of Greece and in the oldest heathen legends of Wales and Ireland. There are intimate correspondences between it and the tradition that reach us from both the extreme east and the extreme west. It changes its shape. It changes its contents. It changes its aura. It changes its atmosphere. But its essential nature remains unchanged, and even that nature is only the nature of a symbol. It refers us to things beyond itself and to things beyond words. Only those who have caught the secret which Rabelais, more than anyone else, reveals to us, the secret of the conjunction of the particular and extreme grossness of our excremental functions in connection with our sexual functions, are on the right track to encompass this receding horizon, where the beyond thought loses itself in the beyond words. The Grail is older than Christianity, as it is older than Glastonbury Tor. Whether we shall find the beyond life on which it is a symbol when we perish, or whether we shall vanish with it into oblivion, we know not, and perhaps will never know. But from reading Homer and Shakespeare, and from the incongruous and disgustingly humorous interminglings of the excremental with the sacramental of which Rabelais makes so much, we can arrive, at least that is the faith which I try to advocate in a Glastonebury romance, at an acceptance of our human life in the spirit of absolutely undogmatic ignorance. Whether death is a walking from one dream to another, or a total snuffing out and entire obliteration, we simply do not know. In either case, the symbolism of the Grail represents a lapping up of one perfect drop of noonday happiness, as Nietzsche, in his poignant words, would say, or as nature itself, according to the hint given us by Goethe, whispers to us in some more voices than at present we are able to hear or to understand when we do hear. Cowan, 1953. Corwin, sorry. Well, that's the introduction. We'll begin next time with the contents, the principal characters in the romance, and the author's note, and Volume 1, The Will. That's Glastonebury Romance, Volume 1, Book 1, next week. Cheers.